Testing.
I can hear you, Mario.
You hear me?
Yep, I can.
Okay. Good morning. Good morning. I was trying to wait till other people begin to poll into or log into the webinar, but I see that we're at 10:05, so I think it's a good time just to get started to jump into the webinar because there is a lot of content that needs to be covered today. A whole lot of content about the strategy map. And one thing you'll be surprised to know that this little management tool has so much power and capabilities that could drive performance in your organization. But let's not wait and just to have this discussion. Let's really just get into it. First, I would like to introduce my friend and colleague, Dr. Abby Adeleke, who would actually just give us some ground rules for the presentation.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this morning, this session with Dr. Mario Wallace. Thank you for joining us. Please, as usual, please mute your microphone if you're not the one speaking at the time. There will be opportunities for questions, as well as when Dr. Mario does ask, for us to unmute and to ask questions. If you have comments and feedback, please leave those in the chat. And then during the questions, in order to identify, well, this would probably be easier. Please just raise your hand. There's the button somewhere at the bottom, depending on your setup. And most importantly, I think most importantly is we gain a lot by participating in this interactive session, the way Dr. Mario presents it. So having said that, I think the next question is, which team are you? This can become a really, really big controversy. Are you team Coke, Coca-Cola, or are you team Pepsi? Well, depending on who you ask. But whichever team you are, please put that in the chat. Or if you're neither, please add that as well. And we'll do that for a few more seconds, and then over to you, Dr. Mario.
Thank you, Dr. Ed. Okay, and we got our answers in there. So, hi again, I'm Dr. Mario Wallace. Welcome to this actual webinar. I've discussed the strategy map numerous of times across all different healthcare sectors, higher education, manufacturing, and so forth. I've spent the last 20 years developing and honing my skill on strategy management, from even the publication of articles and publication of books. I have a certification in the Balanced Scorecard, which is a tool from the Harvard Business School that has existed for over 30 years and considered one of the most innovative and effective strategy management tools today. And I've practiced this methodology for over 15 years, to the point where I feel very confident and effective in how I deliver it and educate people on it. Recently, during COVID, I actually got into the understanding contact tracing and got a certification from Johns Hopkins Hospital to university to help understand, what is contact tracing, what it means, and how does it relate to strategy management. And that was very interesting, and I learned a lot from it. But today I want to just really hone in on the actual strategy map to give you some backdrop and background on what it is and how to effectively use it. So the learning objectives are to discuss the purpose and role of the strategy map, to explain a different type of strategy maps, and to articulate multiple applications of the strategy map. Although you're looking at only 3 actual learning objectives, I'm telling you, there is a lot to unpack within these 3 learning objectives. So the first thing I always do whenever I do a webinar is to talk about strategy as a hypothesis and what does that mean. So strategy is all about testing hypothesis, right? Testing the results and the outcomes of your strategy. And that's why we structure what we call initiative review meetings and strategy review meetings, to be able to test the progress of our strategy and to learn from our strategies. The reason why we say strategy is a hypothesis is that we set targets that may be set too high or too low. And as we attempt to progress our strategic plan, we learn through the process of progressing our strategic plan. Thus, it's similar to a hypothesis that research and scholars use all the time. You're testing something to see the probability or to see if it's factual. So that's how we look at strategy. Strategy is not a punitive situation. It's more a learning situation for an organization. So what does that look like? So when we develop strategy, we think of the time commitment that the organization have to consider, because resources have to be aligned with that time factor. And we think of the value that we have to deliver to the people who are involved or experiencing the strategy, so such as the patients, the students, the customers, the stakeholders, and so forth. So normally, when there is no strategy in the organization, effective strategy developed in the organization, we continue to have business as usual, meaning things do not change. The only way we impact performance in an organization is if we set it towards a specific vision in the future, develop strategic objectives or priorities that drives us towards that particular vision, which eventually creates what we call a value gap, which is a performance gap that we seek to solve by identifying the performance issues as it relates to driving performance within the strategy and capturing that performance issue through training, education, and development, and so forth, so that we can align the right people to the strategy and build up their skill set so they can effectively execute the strategy. So what does it look like in an organization, a strategy-focused organization that's trying to implement and create a culture of being focused on strategy? Well, if you look at the first arrow that I have here, it shows, if you look at so just think of the arrow, the large gray arrow as the organization, and the small red ones as business units within the organization. Most of the time, business unit develop strategies in silo. And when they develop strategies, or leaders in organizations and business unit develops strategies in silo, they're not honing in on the resources across the organization. So everybody is going in their specific direction that supports their industry, but as a organization, a corporation, an enterprise, we need to hone resources across the organization to drive true strategic value within a strategic plan. That is what this looked like. When we have a true strategy focused organization, every business unit is focused in the same direction, although they are independently competing within their own industry. They are fostering an enterprise derived value by everybody working in the same direction. So what do we get from, and what does it look like if we have a strategy focused organization? Well, economies of scale, reduce in cost, shared resources across an organization, shared contracts with vendors, patients, students, getting shared discounts across multiple business units within organizations. Strategically aligned business units, horizontal integrated outcomes, right? If you're working for a tripartite area organization such as an academic medical institution, you have education, research, operation, digital health. When we say horizontal integrated outcome, if we have education and we have clinical and we have research, we tend to try to tie those so that each unit is benefiting off each other to drive value for the patient or the students. Cascaded outcomes and objectives that's developed at the enterprise level that cascaded down into the organization. a budgeted strategic initiatives, meaning that we have initiative that's not budgeted within the business unit, but budgeted at the enterprise or corporate level, right? So to prevent competing priorities within the business unit. If those initiatives are not budgeted at the highest level, that means within those business units, uh, the leaders can decide on which initiatives to fund. And if we have some strong or enterprise level initiative that needs to be forwarded within year 1, year 2, or year 3 of the strategy, we don't need any hiccups or barriers to executing those strategic initiatives. Thus, we fund them in a separate budgeting line called StratX, strategic expenditures, to ensure that we can execute on those strategic initiatives and then share resources across. Now, one book that I wrote is called the Executive Performance Journal. It walks you through step by step phases and drivers for executing a strategy. I suggest this book to everyone, but specifically my clients. I tend to, when I coach clients, I tend to coach them using this particular book. It's considered a journal because you can actually you can actually write in it everything that you're doing leading up to the full development and implementation of your strategy. Now, the model in my book is called the Adam Strategy Management Model. Basically, it groups together the constructs and ideas and the framework of the balanced scorecard into buckets. And I have 4 buckets here. One is analyze, develop, execute, and manage. The strategy map is under the develop bucket or development bucket. And this is the area that we will focus on today. But when you develop in strategy, you need to consider all of these drivers under these particular phases within this framework to actually drive strategy within an organization. Now, just a couple of days ago, new research came out that talked about the balanced scorecard over 30 years and what have we learned today. And the authors of the research, which was basically a study of literature review over the past 30 years, published literature review, peer-reviewed literature review, to determine what is the success, what areas need to be improved as it relates to the balanced scorecard and strategy management. So there were 3 things that came out the research. The first was develop a strategy map in conjunction with the balanced scorecard. The second was to secure your team, your leadership team, to support the balanced scorecard adoption. And the third was broad participation and frequent horizontal communications during development. So today we're talking about developing the strategy map. Basically, the authors said the successful organization develop strategy maps always, not sometime, always. And those strategy map helps to communicate and educate leaders within the organization, even if the initial adoption phase, they don't show a lot of knowledge of the process. The strategy map seems to anchor them. Second, team participation, leadership going out and talking about how they believe in the process of strategy management, being able to articulate their connection to it and why their teams need to get on board and start doing the work of in executing the institutional strategy. And lastly, broad participation and frequent horizontal communication. Remember when I mentioned minutes ago about a academic medical organization with a tripartite mission, with tripartite mission areas such as clinical, education, and research. If you're having a strategy review meeting, you want to have a horizontal communication, meaning at the review meeting, you want leaders and people from each area, each mission area, to discuss their pain points and successes as it relates to their strategy. Thus, that creates the horizontal communication. That means that within each mission area, the people who are collectively in the meeting can listen and learn and share best practices of what's taking place within their actual theme or mission area. Thus, that creates the horizontal communication. So when you think of executing a strategy, think of all creating a strategy map first. I mean, always having a strategy map, making sure the leaders are on board with it, making sure at least 25%. If you can get 25%, you can drive those 25% of people who have bought into it to increase the amount of participation across the organization. And lastly, make sure you set up the concept of horizontal communication, because that drives that keeps the narrative, that shares the narrative and keeps the communication going in the organization. So the crux of this webinar is, what is a strategy map? So basically, at the surface level, it's a one-page diagram that captures the strategic objectives within that an organization wants to pursue. So the strategy map does not have measures, targets, and initiatives. It only has the organization's strategic objectives. Now, sometime an organization will create goals that associate with the strategic vision. And based on those goals, they create strategic objective that supports those goals. However you choose to do it, the strategy map hones in on the goals or the strategic objectives within the organization. It's a one-page document. Remember that. The strategy map uses 4 perspectives, and that's financial, stakeholders, internal processes, and talent and technology, to provide a holistic view of the organization. So what the authors of the strategy map in the balanced scorecard, Kaplan and Norton at the Harvard Business School, what they realized in their seminal research was that most organizations, when they begin to, based on the data that they collected, they realized that most organizations determine success based on financial outcomes. And what they found within their research, based on themes, that emerging themes, that there were 3 other perspectives that organizations were not considering. One was the customer view of the services being delivered. The other was the internal processes, the area that really drives performance. And that's the things that consistently needs to be improved, such as customer relationships, new business application procedures and processes, and new systems within your organizations, right? New products and new services. And lastly was talent and technology, which is, how do we align the talent, the technology systems, and the culture to a strategic plan? And do those intangible assets, which are difficult to measure for most leaders, do they have value? Or do they drive value within the strategic plan? But we're going to talk more about it. We'll get more into it. So this is a strategy map. According to the definition, a strategy map has 4 perspectives. And you see at the top, if you can see my cursor here, financials, shareholder, internal processing, talent, technology. This document has strategic objectives only, and prefixes in front of the strategic objectives. If you can see at the top, financial, top left, where it says contribute to stakeholder value, and you can see F1 in front of it, the prefix tends to anchor people to a specific strategic objective. So if I develop a measure, target, initiative and put it into a scorecard, I would actually align that measure, target, initiative to that prefix. So F1, my measure would be MF1, my initiative would be IF1. So everything will align directly to that specific prefix. So this is where we begin to create the strategic alignment. And if we think of the document itself, the map, we think of cause and effect, right? So when we build a map, we build it from thinking about the financials at the top, right? What are the financials we want to achieve? And this is a human resources strategy map. So there really are no financials that we're trying to achieve other than cost saving for the organization. So whatever budget that the organization is providing to the human resources department, we want to be stewards of that, of the funds, and we also want to find cost saving opportunities for the organization. So you see at F4 at the top, it has minimized HR costs. But what is the financial value that HR can drive an organization? So F1 is contribute to shareholders' value, though the customers of the human resources department are the leaders across an organization. F2, become an employer of choice to drive new, to be recognized as, for instance, an inclusive excellence culture, high performing culture, organization to drive potential employees to a specific organization and maximize return on human capital. So we first set the outcomes and then we build what do the customer expect to gain from receiving those outcomes, and we keep going down, well, what are the processes that we need to do to achieve those outcomes consistently, and how do we continue to improve on those processes within the internal processes? And lastly, talent and technology, who are the people that we need to recruit? How do we need to develop and skill them up? What culture do we need to thrive in to ensure that they can drive performance within the strategy? And we think of culture, we also think of employee engagement. What should the engagement scores be? How should we and invest in our leadership team to drive performance and align them to the strategy? And what technologies do we need? So basically, we need to address three things in the internal process, in the talent technology perspective, and that's human capital, information capital, and cultural capital. So you build strategic objectives around those three intangible assets, and ultimately, this document becomes a communication tool. So everybody in the organization should have a copy of this document. And if I were to work with your organization and I came into your organization and I met the first person who is an employee of the organization, and I asked that person, how does the work you're doing right now support the strategic plan for the organization? They should be able to pull out this strategy map, point to the actual strategic objective, and say, my work contributes to this specific strategic objective. That's how it needs to be ingrained deeply in your organization. So let's go a little further. So the top of the strategy map focus on tangible assets, meaning tangible financial asset that you can touch, feel, and so forth. You can see the numbers, right? Maximize return on human capital. We can calculate what that looks like. What is the return? We hired people into our organization. We develop them through leadership programs. What is the return the organization is achieving from them? We can quantify that. We can minimize HR costs. We can look at the budget that was given, and we can see the cost savings, and we can see the amount of the budget we use at the end of the fiscal year, and that we came under. But we also can see cost savings based on process improvement initiatives within the organization. Now, the objective of the strategy map is to align the bottom, the people, the culture, and the systems and technology to the financial assets, to the tangible. We have to align the intangible to the tangible, right? The difficulty of intangibles is you're measuring the knowledge of the people. right? It's not an easy measure. You're measuring the culture impact on the strategy. You're measuring the technology impact on the strategy. And sometimes it's difficult for us to understand how to do it. But I will show examples in this presentation. But as we recruit and hire, the goal is to recruit. If we're trying to identify strategic hires, the goal is to recruit, make sure and have a rubric on what is a strategic hire. And we hire according to the strategy. If we're trying to foster the right culture, we first need to understand the engagement levels, right? If we have a culture with 35% of the people engaged, I mean, how does that truly drive performance in the organization? So then we have to think of the action plans that we need to execute to increase the level of engagement. If we introduce a new plan, it creates resistance, barriers to change, because people who've done it one way want to continue to do it that way. So we have to consider how do we mitigate resistance going forward in order to drive performance in the organization. Technology systems. We don't need to just buy a technology system because there are so many in the market. What we need to be thinking about is what technology system do we need to leverage the skills of the employees to drive the strategic plan? So again, cause and effect matrix, the top, we're thinking about tangible. A balance sheet has existed for 50 years or longer. So on a balance sheet, we see long-term and short-term investments for a company. But at the bottom, we don't have a balance sheet for culture, recruit and hire, development, technology systems. So we have to align them to more of a concept of a balance sheet. The thing about talent technology is if there is no alignment, direct alignment or indirect alignment to the finance, the tangible outcomes, then we can't determine the value that the people are delivering in the organization. This is the how. This is the how of the map. So the strategy map, there are two different types of strategy maps. There is a for-profit and a not-for-profit or a non-profit. And then there's a blended version. So, so this one is considered a for-profit strategy map, meaning it's a company like Amazon, Apple, Walmart, Target, right? So the things that we need to focus on when it comes to a for-profit map is, if you look at the top, you need to focus on short and long-term financial outcomes for the organization, achieving short and long-term finances. Stakeholder, you need to think of the stakeholder proposition. What's the value that we want to deliver to the stakeholder? And as we drop down into the internal processes, there are 4 areas of concentration that we need to focus on: operation efficiencies consistently, customer management processes, innovative processes, and compliance and social responsibility processes. Those are the type of objectives we need to develop in each area. And as we get down to the bottom, we need to focus on human capital, technology capital, and organizational capital. So these are based on 20 years of research for the Balanced Scorecard Hall of Fame. Kaplan and Norton were able to identify different focuses that organizations were using to determine their success. And these are the things that came out of the research. Now, do you have to use these specific themes as it crosses internal processes? No. You can choose whichever things that you want to use, because everybody's organization is different. So you need to localize this process to make it fit your organization. But core themes are considered pillars, the pillars within your organization. and how those pillars align with the vision that you're trying to create. And mainly there's 4 themes, but I've seen strategy maps with 5, 6. I've seen strategy maps with 2 or 3. You depend, it's based on your organization. This is give you something to land on so you can consider as you develop your strategy map. When it comes to a not-for-profit or non-profit organization, as you see at the bottom, you start with funding. So a non-profit organization seeks funding to fund the initiatives and strategy in the organization. And at the top, you don't see financial outcomes, you see shareholder value proposition. So who are the shareholders, the patients? If you think of a healthcare organization, you think of a higher ed institution, a public higher ed institution, you think of the students, right? So the focus is different for a nonprofit and a for-profit. The bottom, you have resources. What's the funding, the staffing, the materials, and the assets? Talent, technology, you think of the same thing: human capital, technology capital, organizational capital. But when you think of the themes in the center, the themes are somewhat different according to the mission of the nonprofit organization. And this one is economical development, youth development, and vibrant community. For a community health center, the community health center is also considered a nonprofit entity that drives performances. So we have to think about what is the mission of the nonprofit, and what should the focus of the strategy be, and how do we drive this performance to those shareholders. Now, a blended version that most people use is at the top, they can have shareholders on one side and financial on the opposite side. So this is a blended version of a strategy map. At the bottom again, human capital, technology capital, and organizational capital. And as you go up, you can change those themes out. On the shareholder side, on the left side of the map, you can actually place youth development, vibrant community. And on the right side of the map, you can place innovation, operation efficiency. It depends on how you want to bucket it. But remember now, a strategy map is a cause and effect diagram. The bottom impacts the layer as it goes up. Anybody have questions on this one and how it relates to the individual ones for nonprofit or for-profit?
I think you would get more. I like this blended version because I think even in for-profit organizations, there's still a social responsibility that borders on the nonprofits. What comes to mind? 2 things that come to mind readily is kind of like the Walmart Foundation, as well as the Walton Family Foundation. And so even though they're separate entities, they kind of cross-function in their ultimate objective. So I at the back of my mind, I'm thinking of a pyramid. So they ultimately funnel through in terms of the core mission of the company as a whole. That I like the fact that you get the quote unquote the best of both worlds.
Okay.
In a blended version of a strategy map.
Yes. Yeah. And this is one of the most popular ones that's used today, because when I work with a nonprofit, the first thing they say is that our goal is not to achieve and maximize financial outcomes. And they say, well, I mean, how would our patients think about that? How would our students think about that? That's not what our mission is. Not. We are grant funded mostly, soft money. So because the first one, the most popular one is for profit, right? And when I talk to them, I first share them a for-profit model, and then they begin to push against it. Then I bring out the nonprofit model. Then they said, well, we do generate some finance. So I said, well, here's the blended model. And most of the time they go with the blended version. Yeah, that's perfectly said.
I think, sorry, one more thing. And I think in a world where people are choosing where to spend their dollars, and a lot of people, a lot of the consumers, customers, whatever we want to call them, patients, are looking for those companies that leverage the best of both worlds. That even though they're for profit, but they have kind of quote unquote a human angle to them, what they perceive as a human angle, that's also, I think, a plus for the blended version.
Yes, it is. It is. It is. Um, most companies do, even if it's for profit, there is a profit that's being generated within their organization, and customers like to see that a company is profitable, as well as they are steadfast on driving their mission. Right? Why do you exist, and why are you in this rural population or this urban population? And what is the purpose and goal? So do you live that purpose? But also, are you generating revenue to continue to sustain and grow? Because we need you in our community. Um, so here is the thing that's really the crux of it all. Although measures and targets are not on a strategy map, they're in a balanced scorecard. And go, let me uh, um, um, go back to what I said earlier, or I don't know if I even said this. So most successful organizations today perform and drive performance within all four areas of the scorecard, and that is the financial, and they measure the success of these areas: financial, customer, stakeholder outcomes, internal processes, the processes they're working to continuously improve, and the talent, the recruiting, the culture, the engagement, and the technology that augment the skills of the people. um, all of that information is stored in what we call a balanced scorecard. But I'm going to show you how it associate with the strategy map. So how do we set credible measures and targets? How can I set expectation that we can be leaders in our markets? How can I convince my organization that a new way of managing will produce a significant payoff? How much should I be willing to invest in this new approach? How do I set targets for my scorecard? So targets are set based on three things. Either it's a look forward concept, meaning you looking into the future and you're blazing a blue ocean strategy. That means that you're blazing the trail that you're independent in. This is your lane and you control your lane. But then there's a look backwards concept as well, looking at the historical data within your organization to see what are the successes and what areas we need to improve. And lastly, there is a look around, and that is looking at more benchmarking of competitors. Now, of the three, the last one, the look around, is considered the weakest measure, because research tells us if we consistently benchmark, we become a copy of our competitor. We are doing things exactly like our competitors. And the whole thing of competition is not a zero sum game. It's to differentiate yourself in the market, such as Walmart compared to Target, or Walmart compared to Kmart, or Kmart compared to Dillard's, or Dillard's compared to Neiman Marcus, right? They have differentiation strategies that differ them from each other. So what does that look like? So in the article I sent you all to read, there is a story that as soon as the first two paragraphs of the article talked about a um, someone who used to jog, used to participate in different more like the Olympics, and the first, before they became this Olympic runner, long distance runner, um, they lost, or he lost multiple track meets, and his base time was 8 minutes and 54 seconds to run a mile. He was so far off the target that if he continued to run at this pace, he would never win a race. He got so disgusted that he decided to say, you know what, I need to really reevaluate my life, because maybe this is not what I should be doing. So this is related to how you set targets and how you measure those targets. So what he said, so this is considered a baseline. In a strategic plan, we should have baselines. Where are we today and where do we need to be in the future? Right? And so in this one, his baseline was a directional baseline, meaning he wanted to reduce the time it took him to achieve a certain goal. And we see it in strategies all the time. We want to reduce and we want to increase. Those are directional focused. So the next 3 years, he set himself a goal of getting under 4 minutes per mile. And if he could achieve 4 minutes per mile, he would have the best timing to run a mile in the world. So he created a regimen and he began to work towards that. And remember now, strategy is iterative learning. How do we learn from the strategy going forward? So he continued to adjust his regimen weekly until he eventually got under 4 minutes in a mile. And he went out and he began to win all the races as it related to his profession, and became one of the most renowned athletes to do this. And it created a system where most sports trainers use today, because he standardized a structure on how do you improve performance and agility in athletes as it relates to certain goals. So what does that got to do with this particular map? Well, the bottom of the map consists of performance drivers. The top of the map consists of outcome drivers. But we're going to go through that for a second. So what are performance drivers? Right? This creates a cause and effect. So we look at the bottom. If, I know it's pretty small, but these things, the red at the bottom of the map, the red words, are actually built into a scorecard. But I want to show you the cause and effect relationship of how it works. So at the bottom of the map, we have to think of, again, three things, and they're considered performance drivers. They're driving performance within an organization to achieve the outcome at the top of the map, right? The outcomes are end of year or end of strategy measures. Like those are like one-time measures. The stakeholder, did we achieve the stakeholder value within 5 years of our strategic plan? Did we achieve the financial expectation within 5 years of our plan? But how do we do that? We achieve those if we have the right performance drivers. So we think at the bottom of the map, T1, recruit and hire. If we set a target of 100% strategic hires, that would definitely drive performance in our organization. If we T2, 80% of staff with human capital readiness plans. I mean, we are intentionally trying to increase and build our bench strength of our workers, of our leaders. 80% of them should have, and these targets that I'm showing you now, they could be the first year target, the second year target. I'm not saying that these are the target for the 5 years of the strategic plan. You have to set targets per year. I mean, not you when you build your strategy or develop your strategy within the scorecard, you're setting each year, what should year one target be, what should year two target be, and you're driving toward those targets. Fostering a high performing culture, 20% increase in engagement scores year over year. Within 5 years, you should be at 100%, which you may not achieve, but 95% engaged. T4 is 60% of all of leaders at all levels awarded development funding. If you set these targets, that means that everybody, the business and finance department, the advancement department, know that they have to fund 60% of the leaders at all levels of the organization to achieve, to be awarded development funds to actually enter into development programs. Now, we go up a level. Once we set the targets here, we have to think of, well, what is the impact of the targets at the bottom on the internal processes? Now we think of P1, aligning HR planning with the institutional strategy. So 60% of HR strategic initiatives mapped to the institutional strategy. That's something that they have to intentionally do, because today most HR organizations strategies are not aligned to the institutional strategy. So if this was a different business unit, it's still the same thing. Their initiatives need to be aligned to the institutional strategy. That is showing strategic alignment. P2, 10% growth in strategic workforce solutions. That means that if we build our bench strength underneath at T2, where 80% of our staff have human capital readiness plan, all we're asking for in the first year, that 10% of this 80% of people with human capital readiness plans start to show a performance level of delivering strategic workforce solutions to the organization. If we go across under T3, if we look up at P3, ensure a strategy focused organization. So we're saying we need to increase the 20% of engagement scores across the organization. If you look to the left, it says 80% of staff at human capital readiness plan. If you look to the furthest to the left, 10% of strategic hires. How does that really impact ensure a strategy focused organization? It says 30% of business units with a strategic plan and scorecard. That means that the leaders in the organization would have the skill, the knowledge, and the attributes to be able to develop those strategic plans to drive their performance. And then we look over to P4, manage and enhance a world-class leadership program. What we're saying, if we go down to T4, it says 60% of leaders at all levels awarded development funding. But if we go up one to P4, it says 45% of those leaders must graduate from the Leadership Institute. So which first thing, we're trying to award funding to the people who need to be developed. But then secondly, we're saying we need the people who have the funding to actually participate in the organizational leadership programs and to graduate from those programs, because we know that if they graduate and they develop those high level competencies related to the strategy, then we know that they will drive performance and promote the strategy across the organization. Now, once we set these performance targets, now we think of the desired outcome for the organization. So if we look at S1, everything underneath S1 drives us to S1. So stakeholder, it says provide strategic support to business units to attain their goals. The measure is the number of business units supported by internal consultants, right? So what it is, it's if there are 30 business units that we're focused on to drive the strategy, we need to see at least 30% of those business being supported by consultants to help them drive the strategy. So that is the measure of S1. We need to start to see people within the business unit driving the strategy to achieve that outcome. If we go over to S3, world-class skills, competency, and leadership, if we look at the bottom of the map, we can see that performance is being driven from the bottom to the top again. It says world-class skills, competency, and leadership. The target that we've identified is 30% of leaders' performance must reflect the leadership institutions. So whatever programs we have, and we want to see those performance reflected on the outside. That means that as they walk the organization, we need to see them embody the training and education that took place. But we also need to see it in, if we pull their enterprise resource management system, such as a Workday, we need to be able to see that there's a increase in retention, a decrease in turnover, increase in engagement. So we can actually measure the performance of those leaders. But those leaders first, if we go down to the bottom of T4, we first need to ensure that they're awarded funding to go to a development program. If we go up to P4, we need to ensure that they graduate from these programs. If we go up to S3, based on the graduation, based on the funding, we should see the behaviors transferring across the organization of those leaders. And lastly, at the top of the map, for the financial outcomes, we have F1, contribute to stakeholder value, and we have F3, maximize return on human capital. We're saying for the organization at the financial level, for a for-profit or not-for-profit company, we're saying 60% of business unit that has executed its goals. Basically, if we go down to the bottom, first we need to hire the right people. We need to develop human capital readiness plans for the right people. We need to start seeing 10% growth in strategic solutions. We need to align the HR strategy to the institutional strategy. We go up to stakeholders. We need to, the number of business units supported by consultants, make sure that if it's 30 business units, we need to see 30 consultants, or we need to see business units supported by the consultants to drive performance. And as we get to the top, we need to see 60% of those business units execute. We need to see that that 60% of the strategies within the business unit are executed within year 1 or year 2. As we go across the map, as we go through like a cause and effect logic, it says 25% of leaders must achieve strategic impact growth. So if you go to S3 under stakeholder desired outcome, it says world-class skills, competencies, and leadership. 30% of leaders' performance must reflect the leadership institutions, the leadership institute within the organization. The performances that they're doing, we should be able to see it in their scores for engagement, in their scores for retention, in their scores for turnover. But as we go up to the financial, it says out of that 30%, we want to see 25%. The percent is less than 30. We need to see 25% of those leaders achieving a strategic impact in the company. A strategic impact, and that's what are they achieving as it relates to the education, knowledge, and skill that they bring to the organization. How do the organization profit off developing them? Now, this whole cause and effect logic from F3 all the way down to T4, if we're not funding the development of our staff, how do we truly measure human capital return on investment? How do we do it if we're not funding our teams to be developed? And how do we do it if we're not developing them according to the strategic direction, the vision, and the strategy of the organization? See, most of the time, performance management activities don't even align to the strategic plan, right? When you appraise each year, you're appraised on personal goals and professional goals, and those goals not necessarily support the direction of the strategy in the organization. So there's a total misalignment. This is how you align everything back to the strategic plan. Any questions on this one?
So what kind of comes to mind is almost a mental mind shift.
Okay.
In the sense that especially with this last statement you said, that even as we develop goals within organizations, we should kind of flesh out those goals whereby you flesh them down and you bring them back up. They should always either up, down, they should always come back to align to that same goal.
Yes.
The same set of goals. They should not be outside of the goals. In project management, you say scope creep, but they should completely align with the goals that you and the upper leadership, or you and your management, or however it's the organization is structured, that you have developed for that year, and keeping in mind that everything you do should be through the lens of reaching those goals. Nothing should come out of nothing should be outside of the periphery of the goals that you have set. I think if organizations do that, I think we will see greater productivity financially and otherwise within organizations, because oftentimes organizations start well and then somebody else is doing something here. They look around, kind of like what you said earlier, and then they run after that rabbit, and then this person is doing their own, and then at the end of the day, they have lost focus from where they started, which is supposed to be like this. You're chasing everybody else's rabbit.
Yeah.
So it's powerful. It's powerful.
Thank you. And so if there is something new, if suppose an organization receive a grant, well, the grant, even trying to apply for certain grants need to be related to the direction of the strategic plan, right? If our strategic plan is focused on rural health and we're trying to drive population health in rural populations across America, the grants that we're trying to achieve need to focus on rural health. So it's an alignment in the same direction. Now, sometimes leaders are awarded certain funding or awarded certain things throughout the year that somewhat align to the strategy, somewhat, and maybe it don't necessarily directly align, but at the end of each year, you have a strategy refresh meeting. And in those strategy refresh meeting, you basically look at your opportunities and see how do we tweak and adjust the strategy. So you can continue to tweak along the way. You don't have a static strategic plan for 5 years. You have to think about each year. The market is so dynamic. You have to constantly see what's happening, taking place in the market. And you have to pressure test your existing strategy to the new market outcomes. Thus, organization can consistently adjust at that point. And what happens is most organizations have static strategies. And the reason why they end up on the shelf, because after year 2, the world has changed so much that leaders in the organization say, well, why are we still working on this? I mean, I don't see any value of doing this work. You're right, because you need to refresh your strategy once a year. Pressure test your strategy against the market and make adjustments accordingly. And within those adjustments, do red line edits to your existing strategic plan. Edit your existing strategic plan, things that still have value, and socialize those adjustments to your organization and launch that year 2 execution of those initiatives within your plan. So now, once we've developed the strategy map, and we've identified, we created cause and effect logic within the strategy map. Now, before we ever execute it, because we've determined the targets, we've determined the objectives, we determined the direction, we need to now think about what is the risk within the strategic plan, because Although we set targets, although we set direction and objectives, it's not necessarily, it doesn't promise that we can achieve those if there's risk with it, if there's risk embedded within the strategy. So we have to think about risk management as it relates to our strategic plan. So it says strategic risk management is about identifying, evaluating, and managing the risk associated with your strategy. What is the risk associated with your strategy, including evaluating events and scenarios that cannot have a negative but a positive impact on organizational performance? So there's three types of risk. Um, I'm thinking about a movie I saw a couple of days ago that Rumsfeld, uh, uh, doing a press uh, interview, he talked about these same three types of risk as it related to 9/11. But there is um, a known, a known unknown, and a unknown unknown. Known are risks that are identified in HR. So the whole HR department is supposed to be able to identify people risk across organization. So those risks are mitigated by policies and managed through employee labor relations. A known unknown are considered strategic risk, meaning uh, we know that there's a potential, such as trying to align, if we're trying to build Wi-Fi towers in a rural populated area, and that it's based on a relationship with a local politician uh, who has different views about politics versus the president or chancellor of our organization. uh, we know that they the president has to continue to sustain that relationship. But over a course of 5 years, there is a possibility that that relationship can be broken. And if that relationship is broken, it can directly affect the funding of those Wi-Fi towers that are to be uh, um, um, the infrastructure that are to be built across the rural populated area. So we have to think about that. So a known unknown, wherever there is a known unknown, we have to create a contingency plan, and we have to create a mitigating strategy in case that happens. So basically a plan B. And lastly is an unknown unknown. Those are like natural catastrophes, like things that happened in Joplin, the tornado that happened in Joplin a year ago, or um, the oil spill in East Palestine. So those are unknown. But we have to figure out how to build resources, whether funding, whether whatever it is, to ensure that we can somewhat support an unknown. But for a strategic plan, we have to really focus on the known unknowns. So let's go a little step further. So the first thing we have to do is evaluate the strategy map. So what on this map can be potentially a strategic risk? So you have a group of people, especially from the enterprise risk management department, to evaluate this document to determine, is there potential risk somewhere within it. In addition, the targets and measures I showed you earlier, they need to look at the objectives, the measures and targets, and the projects associated with the strategy. And they need to label which one of those are potential compliance risk, audit risk, enterprise risk. They need to identify where they are, and they need to weigh the risk according to a concept called a heat map. So what we do, we build out a particular map. The bottom has likelihood of the risk occurring, and the left of the model of the diagram has impact. So we need to determine what is the acceptable, tolerable, and unacceptable risk within your strategic plan. And basically, we take the initiative, the target, the measure, or the objective, and we just take the number, the prefix, and we just place it on this particular heat map to determine where is the risk within our strategic plan. Where does the risk live or lie within our strategic plan? This model can be a 3x3, a 4x4, a 5x5. It depends on you and your organization. But basically, we place the risk, we bucket it in the category where it fits. You see at the top where it says very high, and it has it's a 20. So we have objective number 1, 2, 3, and 4 populated there because they're considered extremely high risk. And as we go down, we place them where they are within this particular heat map. Then, and I just have numbers 1, 2, 3. You can put the prefix number in those. I just placed something for an example. But then when we transfer it to the strategy map, the strategy map tends to look different now. We can see exactly where the risk is on the strategy map. And that means everybody in the organization can see where the risk is. And the people in the organization that are responsible for those objectives that have the risk associated with them have to help the compliance, the audit, and the enterprise risk management departments mitigate the risk consistently. The goal is to take the risk from red to orange to yellow to green. So if, for instance, as stakeholder S3 is 12, we don't need S3 risk to become red. We need to keep mitigating it to become yellow and green. You have to mitigate it. In every strategy review meeting, the risk team has to come in and discuss the risk. So where are we with S3? Have we mitigated it to yellow or green? Well, it's hinging towards red. What's causing it to be red? Was a lot of when we did our engagement census, only 20% of the leaders were engaged in the organization. So that's where the work needs to start. There is all a cause and effect. We have to figure out what is causing certain things to not be mitigated accordingly. Thus, we have a risk indicator to help us to achieve the outcome. And that risk needs to just be highlighted and populated on the strategy map. This is the complexity and ease of using this particular tool. Thus, it seems complex and it's layered, but it provides us with the right things that we need to achieve the outcome for the organization. If there is risk, and there should be risk, there should be a level of stretching in a strategic plan. If there is risk, we have to find a way to mitigate the risk. We cannot act as if the risk doesn't exist within the strategy. Now, performance of the cabinet of the leaders. We have to tie the leaders to the strategic plan as well. In order for us to truly achieve outcomes, the leaders need to be tied to the strategic plan. So how do we tie leaders to the strategic plan? The leaders are tied at the top. We have to tie the cabinet or the executive leaders who's responsible. We have to tie them to the outcomes of the strategy. The mid-level leaders and frontline workers are the ones that's driving performance from talent and technology to internal processes. But the executive leadership team needs to be tied at the top. They need to be responsible for the annual outcome expectations of the strategy. Thus, if we're in Q2 or Q3 and it doesn't seem like we're trending towards the expected outcome for Q4 when we do our annual report out, that leader needs to be sending messages down into the organization to talk about what are the barriers and why are we not on target to achieve the annual financial outcomes? So thus, that's why we schedule quarterly strategy review meetings where cabinets are present so they can talk about the progress that's taking place in their units. So at the end of the year, at the um, during the fourth quarter, it's not by surprise that they did not achieve the annual outcomes because they're keeping a pulse on what's taking place throughout the year. So you tie the cabinet or the C-suite's performance plans to the strategic plan. It's just another source of alignment. We need to align them to the strategic plan. And this is how we align them. It depends on what the outcomes are at the top. We align them to those particular outcomes. Again, back to the strategy map. There is a concept of the strategy map. It's called human capital readiness. So now how do we align the talent? How do we create human capital readiness plans? How do we align the KSAs, the knowledge, skills, and attributes to the strategy? And how do we know if we're achieving them? This is an intangible asset. The bottom of the map, human capital readiness, which is most difficult for most leaders to measure because they have never measured the knowledge that people have achieved and the skill sets that they've leveled up to drive performance. But it goes back to the same thing. So here's a strategy map again. And what do we do? The area of the strategy map that has to consistently be improved is the internal processes. Anything associated with the internal processes have to be consistently improved. So when it comes to human capital readiness and tying the people to strategy, we tie them to the internal processes to determine the competencies, the KSAs, knowledge, skills, and attributes as it relates to the people driving and consistently improving the performances of the internal processes. If we improve the performance here, then we can achieve the outcomes for the stakeholders and the financials. So if we focus here, we anchor to the internal process as it relates to human capital readiness. We place the internal processes at the top. We identify the people who have to do the work associated with the internal processes. We identify the competencies and skills that's needed to drive performance. And then we assess the people. We get a score, and based on that score, for instance, as it relates to aligning HR planning with the institutional strategy, there are 10 people who's supposed to do this, 10 consultants. And within those 10, only 10% of the 10 are ready to do the work. Now, how do we truly achieve stakeholder value if we only have 10% of the people who can do the work? So we must figure out how do we develop these 10 people, because we have a score now. They've taken an assessment or whatever we've done to evaluate their skill set. And we have a score of 10%, which is in red. We have to increase this in order for us to truly drive performance in the organization. And we can do that by an assessment. You basically determine what they are as far as the groups of people, the strategic families that we've aligned to the strategy. We create some type of assessments to assess their capabilities. And it's more of a dual assessment, or meaning that they self-assess themselves and then the manager assess them, or their peers can also assess them, and we come up with a score. So we're assessing based on can teach others, well-rounded, can fly alone, and limited and may need support. But then after we work on human capital and we determine what it is and we create those development plans and we have the leaders to coach, we send them to the leadership institutes within the organization or leadership development programs, or we have the leaders to coach them, then we shift to performance management. So what does that look like? Basically, we look at the internal processes, where the work has to be done, and we identify the performance activities for the work. Here we have for P1, align HR planning with the strategy. We says in order to do that, we must reconcile the HR strategy to the institutional strategy, meaning hypothetically, suppose HR was not normal, it wasn't a normal practice to align to the institutional strategy. So what they would have to do now is to reconcile that practice and align to the institutional strategy. And if you saw the measure in maybe 5 slides back, I have 60% of the HR initiatives need to be aligned to the strategic plan. So everything at the bottom, these light orange boxes at the bottom of the map, are performance activities that are assigned to people within the organization. Everything across the bottom here, they connect to these strategic objectives, but these are the activities to achieve that strategic objective. These are the activities to achieve this one, and so forth. So you think of manage an enhanced world-class program. So manage the employee development program, manage leadership development program, provide executive coaching. Those are the activities that has to be done. These activities will be assigned to people, and they will be appraised on those activities at the end of the year. You have to map the performance activities to the actual strategic objective. And when you map the performance activities to the strategic objectives, then you are mobilizing strategy. This is the crux of the strategy. You have to identify the activities associated with the strategic objectives. You have to map them to the actual strategic objectives, and you have to assign them to people. So if there are 5 talent development consultants, all 5 owns these 3. Over here, provide workforce solution. If there are 100 human resource business partners, all 100 get these same performance activities for their annual appraisal. So we're grouping people according to the activities to drive performance within the strategy. And then we are evaluating them on those activities at the end of the year. This is direct alignment to strategy. Dr. Abby, look, do you have a question on this one?
No, I was just at the back of my mind, I was thinking if, say, there are 10 people that are aligned to the same, have the same goals, so to speak, would that create a healthy or unhealthy competition within that pool of people, each one of them trying to one up the other? I mean, ultimately it benefits the company, but does it create an unhealthy competition among peers?
Well, the thing, it can, but what we do, we call it friendly competition.
Okay.
So basically we try to award the behavior. So we create these these recognition and award programs that centers around the performances. So we have to incentivize the people who are doing the work. So based on the incentives, people tend to compete. And some friendly competition is somewhat good for an organization. We don't want the negative competition, but we want the friendly. So basically, strategies about, like we said earlier, is testing hypotheses. It's we adjust accordingly. And here's the thing, Dr. Abby, 1 or 2 of the 10 people may have these 3, but they may have another one in another area, right? So everybody's performance based on their level and their skill set and their value to the organization, they may have a set of similar performance outcomes, activities, but they may have some difference. So you may do, everybody's is diversified according to what they bring to the organization. But yeah, we set up what we call friendly competition, and we incentivize that competition. And we have those people who are doing extremely well to talk at those executive leadership meetings on how they are accomplishing so much success. And we take them and we help them become peer coaches for those who are not truly achieving that same level of success. And we take it and we put it into a personal scorecard. So we take these activities, we have a blank personal scorecard like this, and we take these activities and we set with each person who's supposed to have those performance activities, and we take them, we just populate them into a personal scorecard, and that is their personal scorecard that they carry with them every day. They don't have to look at the strategy anymore. They don't have to look at the strategic plan or the strategy map. All they have to do is focus on their personal scorecard. These are your targets. These are the things you need to focus on. All you got to do is focus on these and you're fine. So that means the end of the year, when it comes to the end of your evaluation, you had your personal scorecard all year. Thus, you should be able to manage yourself. You should have a sense of autonomy at this point. Just manage. These are the things that you need to manage. Now, are they negotiable? Yes. When you're creating personal scorecards, you are really giving your direct reports a voice to talk. And you negotiate, you tell them what the expectation is, and you negotiate with each and every one of them. And you all agree to land on certain strategic priorities. And when they agree to them, they sign off on them, and that's theirs for the year. And which brings us to the end. So I know it's a whole lot of information, whole lot of information, but it was alignment of one small management tool, the strategy map, and the complex layers of the strategy map. I just really wanted to do a deeper dive because I've never done a true deep dive of this particular tool to show you how dynamic the tool is, and how you can use it and leverage it in your organization. It consistently connect. And you think of the research that I shared in the beginning based on a literature review over the last 4 or 5 years, where the authors landed on there's 3 things that drives adoption and performance within an organization as it relates to strategy. The first of the 3 was to make sure that each strategy has a strategy map, because leaders can anchor to the map. They may not, all the other complexities that I shared with you may take a while to adapt and get to there, but they can immediately adjust and adapt to the strategy map. So the question is, I always end this way with what did you learn from this particular webinar, the activities, the things that were shared, what benefit came from attending it, and how can you use this information. My thing is the takeaway. How do you take this information and apply it? How do you use this information in your organization to drive performance? That's the key thing. That's very critical to me, because when I do these particular webinars, I'm really trying to educate and to get people to see the value of the information and how do you truly use it to drive performance. Got something to say, Dr. Abby?
Yes, what I was going to say or suggest as a feedback is maybe also have some sample strategy maps.
Okay.
That you put out there. Say this is a sample hypothetical strategy map for a hospital.
Okay.
This is one for a for-profit organization, small business, medium-sized business. This is one for a hybrid organization that people can now use as quote unquote templates
Template, okay.
and almost plug and play as it pertains to their particular organization.
That's a brilliant idea. That is a brilliant idea. Um, and I can use each again literature review, current market data to build out those templates. Uh, I think I think that could, because here's the thing: when it comes to trying to motivate people to do the work, especially if the work is complex, if you can give them something to react to, I think it gets an early buy-in to what you're trying to sell. So that's a brilliant idea. I mean,
Yeah, that's because that way people can, it's almost as if it's a template and they can plug and play, change the language as it pertains to their organization. And I now this is me putting on my marketing hat, because I see money in everything. Sorry, but that's kind of people are visual. I like the academics of things, but some people just like to see the visual and say, okay, step one, put this here. Step two, put this here, and then then it becomes something that becomes a document for them. And then maybe something to the effect that, and if you get stuck, reach out to Dr. Mario here. But I think something like that, visual representation, samples, templates, I think will be helpful to a lot of people, not just big organizations, nonprofits, as well as small micro businesses that don't have the slew of employees to do this work, but they want to do something that is, sounds very professional, that maybe they can leverage.
yeah, I like that. I can definitely see that. I can even see a book published on those just different industries, chapters related to different industries, and the in comparison between if it's a nonprofit or a for-profit, what can it look like? Those particular templates. So yeah, thanks for that. Thanks for that information. Um, Again, I always close out with emotional footprint from -10 to +10. How do you rank the information that was provided today? With what did you find interesting, surprising, and actionable? Um, this is another critical step within the presentation because it helps me to adjust and learn from your information, your contents to create more sound and effective trainings going forward. Um, Again, here these are the books and things that are on the market. Um, what Dr. Abby said, the third artifact, the Hermosamente Estragia, is almost similar, but not. It's what's different from the templates that you mentioned, because these are more models that's created into art form that gives them somewhat of a template for how to do certain things as it relates to the models that I've designed. But when it comes to the strategy map, that's a little divergent, a little different from this. So I definitely can see that too being highly effective uh, for just people within organizations. And April 8th is the next one, aligning performance management strategy. I showed you how to create the activity for performance management and how to align them to specific objective within a strategic plan. But this is a full presentation of what is performance management, what is a healthy organization, how do you continue consistently sustain a healthy organization, which is directly related to performance, employee engagement, and culture. So it connects all those pieces together within one presentation. And this is April 8th, which is 2 weeks from today, in which I will give this actual webinar. This is my contact information for those who need it. It's always a pleasure to actually for you to give the time and energy within your Saturday to attend these. It's always a pleasure, and especially Dr. Abby for always being a partner and helping me to drive this performance, this information to the market. So again, thank you, and expect an email from me soon. But enjoy the rest of your Saturday, and hopefully I'll see you in 2 weeks at the Aligning Performance Management training. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.